My brother has been faking a devastating illness for 10 years, draining our family of every dollar and every ounce of hope we had. He thought his elaborate web of lies was flawless, but he doesn't know our family doctor just called me about his completely healthy blood test results. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The phone rang with the shrill insistence of a fire alarm, cutting through the thick fog of my exhaustion. I had been sitting at my kitchen table for the better part of an hour, a lukewarm cup of tea forgotten in my hands, staring at the mountain of paperwork I'd brought home from the hospital. As a medical records administrator, my life was a structured world of data, patient histories, and the quiet, ordered march of medical facts. It was a profession that suited my personality, calm, meticulous, and grounded in reality. But lately, my own reality had felt anything but calm. My head was throbbing with a persistent, dull ache, a side effect of the stress that had become a permanent resident in our family home. The stress had a name: Julian, my younger brother, the axis around which our family had revolved for nearly a decade. His illness, a supposedly rare and aggressive blood disorder, had hollowed out our lives, replacing joy and spontaneity with a constant, humming anxiety. It had drained my parents' retirement fund, dictated our holiday plans, and painted every family gathering with a somber brush of concern. Julian was the sun, and we were the worried planets caught in his gravitational pull. I glanced at the caller ID. Dr. Alistair Reed, our family physician for over 20 years. A wave of ice-cold dread washed over me. Dr. Reed never called after hours unless it was serious. My first thought, as it always was of Julian. Had something happened? Had there been a sudden downturn? I snatched the phone, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Dr. Reed," I said, my voice tight. "Deborah, hello, I'm sorry to bother you so late. Is this an okay time?" His voice was calm, as always, but there was an undercurrent of something I couldn't quite place. Not urgency, but confusion. "Of course, is everything all right? Is it Julian?" There was a slight pause on the other end. "Well, yes, it is about Julian. He came in for a routine physical yesterday," said his mother insisted. "I ran a standard blood panel, just to have a baseline in our system since all his specialized care is handled elsewhere." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "Yes, his specialists are in the city. He sees them every few months." It was a story we had repeated so often it felt like a sacred text. The treatments were experimental, the doctors were top of their field, and the costs were astronomical. Right, that's what he told me," Dr. Reed continued. "He even brought in his latest reports from his hematologist to show me. Very alarming stuff. According to those charts, his platelet counts are dangerously low, and his white blood cell morphology is, well, it's highly irregular. Consistent with the rare condition he described." "So what's the problem?" I asked, the dread tightening its grip. "That's just it, Deborah," he said, and the confusion in his voice became more pronounced. "There is no problem. I'm looking at the results from our lab right now. His blood work is perfect. Not just good, but textbook perfect. Platelets are robust, white cells are normal, red cells are healthy. If I didn't know any better, I'd say he was a poster child for excellent health. It's the cleanest panel I've seen all month." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. "What? That's impossible. His specialists just told him last month that he was on the verge of needing a new, even more aggressive treatment." "I wouldn't know about that," Dr. Reed said carefully. "But the blood that I drew from his arm yesterday tells a completely different story. It's so different, in fact, that I initially thought the lab had made a mistake. I had them run it again. Same result. There is absolutely nothing wrong with his blood." He paused again, then lowered his voice slightly. "Deborah, the reports he showed me listed results that were dire, life-threatening. The results I'm holding in my hand belong to a completely healthy 38-year-old man. The two cannot both be true." I couldn't speak. A roaring sound filled my ears. My mind raced back through a decade of canceled vacations, of hushed phone calls, of my mother's tear-streaked face. My father, a proud man, taking on extra shifts at 65 to help cover the cost of another experimental infusion. The endless fundraisers, the community bake sales, the second mortgage on my parents' home. My own savings, meticulously built over 20 years. Now reduced to a meager emergency fund after I'd given Julian everything I had for a life-saving procedure 2 years ago. It wasn't just the money, it was the emotional toll. The holidays spent in waiting rooms, the birthdays celebrated with a cloud of fear overhead. We had structured our entire existence around the fragility of Julian's health. We had sacrificed, we had worried, we had prayed. And Dr. Reed was telling me it was all based on a lie. The memory of something I had seen just last week flashed in my mind, something I had dismissed at the time. I'd been at Julian's apartment, helping him tidy up because he was having a low-energy day. While looking for a box for some old books, I'd stumbled upon another one tucked away in the back of his closet. It was filled with papers. I'd only glanced at it, but I'd seen what looked like blank letterheads from medical clinics and stacks of what I now realized were pristine, unfilled prescription pads. At the time, I'd assumed they were just supplies his specialists had given him. Now, the image took on a sickening new light. "Deborah, are you still there?" Dr. Reed's voice pulled me back to the present. I swallowed hard, trying to find my voice. The dull ache in my head had sharpened into a piercing pain. Yes, I'm here." My voice was a hoarse whisper. "Thank you, doctor. Thank you for telling me this directly." "I just thought you should know," he said gently. "Something isn't right here." After we hung up, I remained frozen at the table, the phone slipping from my numb fingers. The silence of my small house was deafening. The ordered world of facts and data I had built my life around had just been obliterated by one impossible truth. My brother wasn't sick. He wasn't dying. He was a liar. And we, his loving, devoted family, were his victims. The betrayal was worse than any diagnosis could ever have been. The hours that followed Dr. Reed's call were a blur of cold shock and white-hot anger. I didn't sleep. I paced the length of my small living room, the polished hardwood floors offering no comfort, only a hollow echo of my restless steps. With every circuit, a new memory surfaced, each one now tainted by the poison of this new reality. Julian, pale and leaning heavily on our father's arm at a family wedding. Julian, describing his symptoms in excruciating detail, his voice weak and breathy. Julian, gratefully accepting a check from our aunt, tears welling in his eyes as he spoke of how this money would give him a fighting chance. How could we have been so blind? The signs, in retrospect, were there, like faint writing in invisible ink suddenly held up to a flame. His illnesses were always complex enough to be confusing, his specialists always located in another city, making direct contact impossible for us. His symptoms would flare up conveniently whenever a family obligation or a job opportunity arose. He had an answer for everything, weaving a tapestry of medical jargon and emotional appeals that left no room for doubt. He played the part of the tragic patient so masterfully that we never thought to question the script. My professional mind, the part of me trained to see patterns and discrepancies in records, kicked in. I thought about the forged documents I had glimpsed. The precision, the detail, this wasn't a whim. This was a calculated, long-term deception. My brother, my charming, sensitive brother, was a con artist. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a text from him. "Feeling really rough today. The new meds are hitting me hard. Could you possibly drop off some soup later? Mom's is the only thing I can keep down." Reading the words felt like swallowing shards of glass. The manipulation was so casual, so ingrained in our daily interactions. For a decade, a message like that would have sent me into a flurry of worried activity. I would have dropped everything, driven to our mother's house, and then rushed to his side. Today, I just stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the keypad. My first instinct was to call him out, to scream the truth into the phone, but something held me back. An icy calm began to settle over my anger. A direct confrontation would only lead to more lies, more denials. He would twist it, turn it back on me, and paint me as cruel and uncaring. He had done it before, on the rare occasions anyone had gently questioned his narrative. No, he had built this lie meticulously over 10 years. I would deconstruct it with the same level of care. My grief and anger were real, but my resolve was hardening into something cold and sharp. He had used our love and trust as a weapon against us. I would use the truth as my shield. I typed back a simple reply, "So sorry to hear that. I'm swamped with work today, but I'll see what I can do. Hang in there." The response was almost immediate. "Oh, okay. No worries, I'll figure something out." The subtle guilt trip was a classic Julian maneuver. It was designed to keep me feel selfish, to remind me that my problems were trivial compared to his life-and-death struggle. It had always worked, but not anymore. Later that afternoon, I called him. I needed to hear his voice, to see if I could detect the lie now that I knew what to listen for. "Hey, Deb," he answered, his voice deliberately weak. "How's your day?" "It's been busy," I said, keeping my tone level. "I was just thinking about you. How are you really feeling?" He sighed dramatically, a sound I knew so well. "Just exhausted. You know how it is. It's like my body is fighting a war every single day. The doctor says this new medication is our last real shot, but the side effects are brutal. I feel like I'm made of lead." It was a performance, and for the first time, I could see the strings. I could hear the theatricality in his carefully chosen words, the rehearsed fatigue in his tone. I felt a profound sense of detachment, as if I were watching a stranger in a movie. "That sounds awful, Julian," I said, and the words felt like ash in my mouth. "We need to make sure you have everything you need for this to work." "I know," he said, his voice brightening slightly at the prospect of support. "That's why I was hoping we could all talk this weekend about the next phase of the treatment. It's going to be the most expensive one yet." There it was, the purpose of the call, the reason for the performance. Money. It was always about money. A cold fury settled in my stomach. He wasn't just lying, he was preparing to drain us even further. He was getting ready to take more from our parents, who had already given him everything. "Of course," I said, my voice dangerously smooth. "We should absolutely talk. Let's set up a family meeting." We ended the call, and I leaned my head against the cool glass of my office window. The entire foundation of my family was built on a fraud. Julian had spent a decade perfecting his story, his symptoms, his forgeries. He believed he was untouchable, that our love for him was a bottomless well of resources and sympathy he could draw from forever. But he had forgotten one crucial thing. He had forgotten my profession. He had forgotten that I spent my days navigating the very world he was trying to imitate, that I could spot a forged document and a falsified record from a mile away. He thought he was an expert, but he was an amateur playing in a professional's arena. And the game was about to change. To understand the depth of Julian's betrayal, you have to understand the decade he stole from us. It began subtly. He was in his late 20s, drifting between jobs, never quite finding his footing. While I was building my career and my own life, he was still living at home, full of artistic aspirations but lacking the discipline to pursue them. Then came the first symptoms: chronic fatigue, mysterious aches, and an array of baffling issues that sent him from one doctor to another. We were worried, of course. My mother, in particular, was consumed with anxiety. The diagnosis, when it finally came, was delivered to us by Julian himself. He sat our parents and me down in the living room, his face pale, a sheaf of papers from an out-of-state specialist in his trembling hands. He told us he had a rare, degenerative blood disorder. He used long, complicated words, thrombocytopenia myelodysplastic syndrome, that we didn't understand, but that sounded terrifying. He explained that it was a lifelong battle, that there was no cure, only a series of costly treatments to manage the symptoms and prolong his life. That was the day the world shifted. Our family, once a normal, bustling unit with individual hopes and dreams, became a support system for a single cause: saving Julian. My father, who had been looking forward to retirement, quietly unretired. My mother's life became a cycle of preparing special meals, researching alternative therapies, and managing Julian's complex medication schedule. My own life goals, buying a bigger house, traveling, maybe starting a family of my own, were shelved. Every spare dollar, every spare moment, was redirected to the Julian Fund. Julian, in turn, fully embraced his role as the tragic patient. He became an expert on his own condition. He could talk for hours about his platelet counts, his cellular abnormalities, and the latest clinical trials. He joined online support groups, though now I suspect it was less for comfort and more for research. He was charmingly brave, always putting on a smile for the family, which only made us admire his strength more. He never wanted to be a burden, he'd say, even as he accepted the thousands of dollars we poured into his care. His manipulation was an art form. He knew exactly which buttons to push with each of us. With Mom, it was her maternal guilt. He would call her late at night, his voice barely a whisper, telling her he was scared. She would be at his apartment within the hour, a pot of soup and her check. K-book in hand. With Dad, it was his sense of duty as a provider. Julian would talk about how he wished he could work and pull his own weight, how it killed him to see our father working so hard in his golden years. The next day, Dad would transfer more money into his account. With me, it was my sense of logic and responsibility. He would present me with detailed, official-looking invoices from clinics I'd never heard of, with itemized lists for plasma infusions and genetic sequencing. It looked legitimate, and because I loved him and was terrified of losing him, I never questioned it. I organized fundraisers, I liquidated stocks, I became the family's financial manager for his illness. He exploited my competence, turning my own strengths against me. Looking back, the antagonist wasn't just Julian, it was the persona he created. The sick Julian was a completely different person from the brother I grew up with. My real brother was funny and a little lazy, creative but unfocused. This new Julian was a martyr. He was fragile, wise beyond his years, and tragically noble. He spoke of his illness as a journey and of our support as a blessing. His disingenuousness was polished to a high shine. His appearance was part of the act. He was always thin. He claimed the medications ruined his appetite. His face always a little pale, easily achieved with a lack of sun and perhaps a bit of makeup, and his movements always slow and deliberate. His interest in our assets was always cloaked in concern. "Dad, are you sure you should be selling those stocks? The market is down," he'd say, knowing full well our father would sell them anyway for his sake. "Deborah, please don't drain your savings for me," he would insist, while sending me the link to a new experimental treatment facility with a 5-figure price tag. He made us feel like we were the ones pushing to help him, that he was the reluctant recipient of a generosity he felt he didn't deserve. It was a masterful performance. He had isolated us with his lies, making our entire family a closed loop of fear, sacrifice, and deception, with him at the calm, controlling center. And for 10 years, we never saw the truth. We were all willing actors in his one-man show. The turning point came 2 days after Dr. Reed's phone call. The initial shock had subsided, replaced by a cold, clear sense of purpose. I was no longer a grieving sister. I was an investigator. The passive victim who had wept for her brother's fate was gone. In her place was a woman armed with a terrible truth and the professional skills to prove it. My grief would come later. Right now, I needed to be methodical. My first thought was the box of papers I had seen in Julian's closet. I needed to get my hands on it. An opportunity presented itself that very afternoon. Julian sent a group text to the family, heading into the city for a consultation with Dr. Albright. "It's a long shot, but he's pioneering a new stem cell therapy. Please keep your fingers crossed for me. Won't be back until late tonight." Dr. Albright? Another name I'd never heard, another phantom specialist in his elaborate fiction. The text was a performance for our parents, a way to build suspense and hope before he inevitably asked for more money. For me, it was a window of opportunity. I still had a key to his apartment, a relic from the early days of his illness when we were all on high alert for emergencies. My hands trembled slightly as I let myself in. The air was stale, the blinds drawn against the afternoon sun. It looked like the home of an invalid, which I now realized was a carefully constructed stage. I walked straight to his bedroom closet. There, tucked behind a row of old shoes, was the cardboard box. I lifted it out and set it on his bed, my heart pounding. Taking a deep breath, I opened the flaps. It was worse than I had imagined. It wasn't just a few papers, it was an entire forgery kit. There were stacks of blank letterheads from renowned hospitals and cancer centers across the country. There were several prescription pads from doctors I knew for a fact had retired years ago. There was a high-quality printer and several different types of resume paper, perfect for mimicking official documents. And then I found the files on his laptop, which he'd foolishly left open on his desk. He had templates for lab results, for billing statements, for consultation summaries. He had a folder filled with digital copies of real medical reports he'd likely found online, which he used as a basis for his own forgeries. He could simply plug in his name, change a few values, and print out a convincing-looking document. It was a sophisticated operation. He had folders for each year, meticulously tracking his fake medical history. This was the leverage. This was the irrefutable proof. But it wasn't enough to just have it. I needed to understand it, to deconstruct it in a way that my parents, blinded by a decade of love and worry, could not deny. I spent the next hour carefully photographing every document, every screen on his laptop with my phone. I didn't take anything with me. I couldn't risk him knowing I'd been there. I put the box back exactly where I found it, closed the laptop, and let myself out, the silence of the apartment feeling more sinister than before. Back in my own home, I began my work. This was my world. I spent my days analyzing medical records, cross-referencing data, and ensuring accuracy. Julian had made a fatal error. He had tried to play a game in my home territory. I started with the lab reports. I pulled up the photos I had taken and compared them to the legitimate formats I had access to through my hospital's digital archives. The discrepancies were subtle, but to my trained eye, they were glaring. A font was slightly off. A medical record number didn't follow the correct format for that specific institution. A lab technician's ID number was fake. One of the reports from a famous clinic in another state had a local zip code in the footer. It was sloppy work, designed to fool amateurs, not a professional. Next, I tackled the doctors. He had a consultation letter from a Dr. Evelyn Reed at a Boston clinic. A quick search of the State Medical Board database revealed that no doctor with that name was licensed to practice in Massachusetts. He had fabricated her existence. The final piece of the puzzle was the money. Our family had been contributing to a joint savings account for Julian's medical emergencies. My mother, bless her heart, was the primary account holder, but she had added my name years ago in case I needed to make a quick transfer for him. I had never looked at the detailed statements before, trusting that the money was going where he said it was. That night, I logged into the online banking portal. My stomach churned as I scrolled through years of transactions. There were a few payments to pharmacies, likely for over-the-counter medications he used to mimic side effects. But the vast majority of the money was not going to clinics or specialists. It was going to high-end clothing stores, to expensive restaurants. There were cash withdrawals from ATMs in resort towns we never knew he visited. There was a recurring payment to a luxury car lease. He wasn't just faking an illness. He was funding a lavish lifestyle on the back of our sacrifice. He was living well while my father worked himself to the bone and my mother cried herself to sleep. The anger that had been simmering within me now boiled over into a cold, hard rage. He hadn't just lied to us. He had stolen from us. He had stolen our money, our time, and our peace of mind. And I was going to take it all back. The opportunity for a preliminary confrontation came sooner than I expected. 2 days after my covert investigation, Julian called me. His voice was laced with a practiced urgency. "Deb, hey, so I just got off the phone with Dr. Albright's office," he began, not even bothering with a hello. "The news is, well, it's hopeful, but it's complicated." I sat back in my chair, my office quiet around me. I took a slow, steadying breath. Complicated how? I asked, my voice betraying none of the fury that was coursing through my veins. The stem cell therapy could be a game changer for me. It could actually put the disease into remission. But the upfront cost for the harvesting and initial treatment is staggering. They need a deposit of $20,000 just to reserve my spot. He let the figure hang in the air, a familiar tactic designed to shock us into action. In the past, a statement like that would have sent me scrambling, my mind immediately calculating what I could sell, who I could borrow from. Today, I felt nothing but contempt. $20,000, I repeated calmly. That's a lot of money, Julian. Did Dr. Albright's office send over the official paperwork? The cost breakdown, the treatment protocol? I'd be happy to look it over, maybe see if our insurance could cover a fraction of it. There was a brief, almost imperceptible hesitation on his end. Yeah, they're sending it over, but it's all very technical. You probably wouldn't understand most of it. This was his standard dismissal, a way to keep us out of the details. Try me, I said, a new edge to my voice. I am a medical records administrator, after all. I understand technical jargon. For instance, what's the CPT code for this new procedure? Every experimental treatment has one for billing purposes. Silence. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head as he tried to formulate a response. He was used to dealing with emotional, uninformed family members, not someone asking for a current procedural terminology code. I don't have that right in front of me, he stammered, his voice losing its fragile patient tone and gaining a defensive sharpness. Why are you interrogating me? I'm telling you I have a chance to T better, and you're asking me about billing codes. I thought you'd be happy for me. I'm just trying to be practical, I said smoothly. It's a huge amount of money. We need to be responsible. Speaking of which, I was looking at some old files, and I found that consultation summary you gave us last year from the Boston clinic, from Dr. Evelyn Reed. I let the name hang in the air. The silence on the other end of the line was now thick with tension. What about it? He asked, his voice low and wary. I was just curious about her work, so I looked her up, I continued, my own voice calm and measured. And the strangest thing happened. I couldn't find her. Not in the Massachusetts Medical Registry, not affiliated with the clinic you listed. It's almost as if she doesn't exist. The explosion was immediate. What are you trying to say? He snarled, all pretense of weakness gone. His voice was hard and ugly. Are you accusing me of something? After everything I've been through, everything our family has sacrificed, you're calling me a liar? How dare you, Deborah? You've been getting weird ever since I told you about this new treatment. Is it about the money? Are you finally getting tired of helping your sick brother? His strategy was clear: attack, deflect, and induce guilt. He was trying to turn the tables, to paint me as the villain who was kicking him when he was down. It was a well-honed defense mechanism. But this time, I didn't back down. I didn't apologize. I didn't soothe his manufactured outrage. I just stayed silent, letting his angry words echo in the space between us. My silence was more powerful than any argument I could have made. It was an accusation in itself, and he knew it. You know what? I don't have to listen to this, he finally spat, his voice trembling with rage. I'm fighting for my life here, and my own sister is trying to tear me down. I'll talk to Mom and Dad. They actually care about me. He hung up. I slowly lowered the phone, my hand perfectly steady. The confrontation hadn't been a dramatic, movie-style reveal, but it had served its purpose. I had cracked his armor. I had seen the real Julian, the cornered, vicious manipulator beneath the fragile, suffering patient. His reaction wasn't one of a misunderstood sick person. It was the panic of a fraud on the verge of being exposed. He thought he could still control the narrative by running to our parents. He had no idea that I was already one step ahead of him. His panicked lashing out only confirmed my resolve. He was getting desperate, which meant he would soon make a mistake, and I would be there to catch him when he did. The battle lines had been drawn. Julian's attempt to regain control was swift and malicious. Just as I predicted, he ran straight to our parents, weaving a story of a cruel, stressed-out sister who was questioning his illness because she was tired of the financial burden. He didn't just defend himself, he went on the offensive. The next day, I received a tearful call from my mother. "Deborah, what is going on?" she cried. "Julian called us. He sounded completely broken. He said you accused him of making things up. How could you be so cruel? That boy is fighting for his life, and you're putting this extra stress on him. He said he's so distraught he's skipping his treatments this week." The fabricated medical emergency. It was his checkmate move, the one he used whenever he felt his control slipping. It was designed to isolate me and rally the family back to his side through fear and guilt. In the past, it would have worked. I would have been forced to apologize, and the family equilibrium would have been restored, with Julian once again at the center of our worried affections. "Mom, I need you and Dad to come over to my house tonight," I said, my voice firm but gentle. "There's something you need to see. Please, just trust me. Don't talk to Julian again until you've spoken with me." My mother was hesitant, but the conviction in my tone must have swayed her. She agreed. That evening, they sat on my sofa, their faces etched with worry and a hint of disapproval. They were prepared to lecture me, to defend their suffering son. They had no idea their entire world was about to be shattered. I didn't start with accusations. I started with facts. I had prepared everything meticulously, creating a dossier of Julian's deception. I placed a file folder on the coffee table in front of them. "I know this is going to be difficult to hear," I began softly. "But I need you to listen to me, not as Julian's mother and father, but just for a moment as clear-headed people. I love Julian just as you do. Everything I have done is to protect this family." I started with Dr. Reed. I recounted, word for word, my conversation with him. I showed them the email Dr. Reed had sent me, at my request, with an official, signed copy of Julian's perfectly normal blood test results. My father, a man who believed in concrete evidence. Ensei picked up the paper, his brow furrowed. Next, I showed them the photos of the forgeries. I placed a picture of one of Julian's fake lab reports next to a genuine report from my hospital's system, with all patient information redacted, of course. "Look," I said, pointing out the subtle errors. "The font is wrong here. This medical ID number format doesn't exist. This doctor he claims to have seen retired 5 years ago." I checked. My mother shook her head, her hand fluttering to her mouth. "No, there must be a mistake, a mix-up at the lab." "There is no mistake," I said, my voice hardening slightly. I opened my laptop and showed them the bank statements from the family's medical fund. I highlighted the expenses, the lease payments for a sports car, the charges from 5-star hotels in cities he claimed he was visiting for treatments, the withdrawals from casino ATMs. My father's face went pale. He stared at a charge for over $2,000 at a designer watch store. "He told us that was for a deposit on an MRI," he whispered, his voice cracking. The final, irrefutable piece of proof was a letter I had received that very morning. I had taken a gamble and sent a registered letter to the Dr. Albright at the stem cell clinic Julian had mentioned, formally requesting procedural information and billing codes on behalf of the family. The letter had been returned, stamped in bold red ink, "Return to sender. No such addressee." The clinic existed, but the doctor did not. He was a ghost, another character in Julian's sick fantasy. My mother began to sob, a deep, wrenching sound of a heart breaking. My father just sat there, the papers trembling in his hands, his face a mask of utter devastation. The two pillars of our family, strong and resilient for so long, were crumbling before my eyes. The anger I had been holding onto dissolved into a profound sadness for them, for the years they had lost, for the love they had given so freely to a lie. "I know this is painful," I said, my own voice thick with emotion. "But we can't let this go on. He's not just lying to us, he's stealing from you. He's about to ask you for $20,000 that you don't have for a treatment that doesn't exist." It took hours. We talked, we cried, we sat in stunned silence. Their denial slowly gave way to a horrified acceptance. The man they had sacrificed everything for was not a victim, he was their tormentor. By the end of the night, their grief had hardened into a resolve that matched my own. The spell was broken. Julian no longer had them under his control. "What do we do now?" my father asked, his voice heavy with the weight of the last decade. "He called a family meeting to ask for money," I said. "We're going to give him one, but it's not going to go the way he thinks." The family meeting was scheduled for Sunday evening at our parents' house. The atmosphere was thick with a tense, funereal silence. My mother had been moving through the house like a ghost all day, her eyes red-rimmed but her expression firm. My father sat in his usual armchair, his jaw set, staring into the empty fireplace. We were a united front, bound by the painful truth. Julian arrived precisely on time, a detail that was part of his performance. He always made a point of being punctual to show how much he respected the time we were taking for him. He walked in slowly, leaning slightly on a cane I had never seen before, a new prop for his stage. He wore a soft, comfortable sweater, and his expression was one of courageous suffering. He was preparing for his big scene. "Mom, Dad, Deborah," he said, his voice soft and weary. "Thank you for doing this. I know it's a lot to ask." He sat down opposite us on the sofa, carefully placing his cane beside him. He looked at me with an expression of deep disappointment, the prodigal son forgiving his faithless sister. "I know Deborah has some concerns," he began, his voice dripping with false magnanimity. "And I want to clear the air before we talk about the treatment. Deb, I forgive you. I know you're under a lot of stress, and sometimes it's easier to lash out at the people you love. I'm not angry." My father flinched at the sheer audacity of his words. I simply looked at him, my expression unreadable. "Let's hear about the treatment, Julian," I said, my voice cold and even. He seemed to take this as his cue. He launched into his well-rehearsed speech about Dr. Albright and the miraculous stem cell therapy. He spoke of hope, of a future free from pain, of his desire to finally be able to pay our parents back for everything they had done. It was his most compelling performance yet, filled with emotional pauses and teary-eyed glances. He concluded by sliding a single piece of paper onto the coffee table. It was a fabricated invoice for the $20,000 deposit. He looked at my father. "I know it's so much to ask," he whispered, "but this is my last chance." No one spoke, the silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Julian's confident smile began to falter. He looked from our mother's stony face to our father's grim expression. "What's wrong?" he asked, a flicker of panic in his eyes. That was my cue. I leaned forward and placed my own folder on the coffee table next to his fake invoice. It was thick with documents. "We're not going to be paying that, Julian," I said calmly. I opened the folder. "This," I said, sliding Dr. Reed's official report to the top, "is your blood test from 2 weeks ago. It shows you are in perfect health." His face went white. That's a mistake, a lab error." "Is it?" I continued, sliding the bank statements across the table. "Then perhaps you can explain these: a lease for a sports car, a $2,000 watch, trips to resorts we never knew you took. This is where our family's money has been going. Not to clinics, Julian, to you." "This is insane. You've been spying on me?" he shrieked, his voice rising in panic. He stood up, grabbing for his cane. "I don't have to sit here and listen to these lies." "Sit down," my father commanded, his voice a low growl I hadn't heard in years. It was the voice of a man who had reached his limit. Julian froze, shocked into silence. He slowly sank back onto the sofa. One by one, I laid out the rest of the evidence. The photos of his forgery kit, the returned letter from the non-existent Dr. Albright, the proof that Dr. Evelyn Reed was a figment of his imagination. With each new piece of evidence, another layer of his decade-long facade crumbled away. His expression shifted from righteous indignation to cornered fear, and finally to the pathetic, pleading look of a child who had been caught. When I was finished, I closed the folder. The room was silent except for my mother's quiet, steady breathing. 10 years, Julian, my father said, his voice filled with a grief so profound it seemed to suck the air from the room. You let your mother and me work ourselves into old age. You took your sister's life savings. You watched us cry, you watched us worry, and you did nothing. All for what? A fancy car? Watches. Julian finally broke. The carefully constructed persona of the brave patient shattered, revealing the hollow, selfish man beneath. He began to sob, not with remorse, but with the desperation of a failed con man. I didn't mean for it to go on this long, he whimpered, his words tumbling out between gasps. It started small. I just needed some help, a little breathing room, and then it just snowballed. I couldn't stop. I didn't know how to stop. My mother, who had been silent throughout the entire confrontation, finally spoke. Her voice was not angry, but filled with a sorrowful clarity. You do know how to stop, Julian, she said, looking at her son as if for the first time. You stop today. The power dynamic in the room had irrevocably shifted. He was no longer the center of our universe. He was just a liar, exposed and alone, stripped of his power. The curtain had finally come down on his long-running show. The aftermath of the confrontation was not loud or explosive, but a quiet, somber reckoning. Julian's pathetic confessions and tearful apologies held no weight in the face of his decade-long deception. The trust he had methodically destroyed could not be rebuilt with words. My father laid out the terms, his voice devoid of emotion. It was clear this was non-negotiable. First, Julian was to seek intensive psychological help immediately. We all recognized that his behavior, while unforgivable, stemmed from a deep-seated problem that needed professional intervention. Second, he was to create a full, transparent accounting of every penny he had taken from the family over the years. Third, he had to get a job, any job, and begin a strict repayment plan. The alternative was simple. We would provide my entire dossier to the authorities and pursue charges for fraud. He would be cut off from the family completely and irrevocably. Faced with the complete loss of his support system and the very real threat of legal action, Julian agreed to everything. The next day, he sold the Lease sports car and the designer watches. The money, a fraction of what he owed, was the first installment of his restitution. It was a small gesture, but it was a start. He moved out of his apartment, which our parents had been subsidizing, and into a small, rented room across town. The healing process for the rest of us was slow and painful. My mother mourned the son she thought she had, the brave, sick boy who had never really existed. My father grappled with feelings of foolishness and anger, frustrated that he had allowed himself to be manipulated for so long. There were weeks of difficult conversations, of shared grief for the lost years and the stolen security. I took on a new role in the family. I was no longer just the responsible daughter, I was the protector, the one who had brought the truth to light. I helped my parents set up new financial boundaries and worked with them to create a plan to rebuild their decimated retirement savings. It was a daunting task, but for the first time in 10 years, we were making plans for the future that didn't revolve around a fictional illness. We were free. Months passed. Julian adhered to the terms of our agreement. He attended therapy 3 times a week. He got a job at a local warehouse, a humbling position that required the physical labor he had claimed to be incapable of for so long. His repayments were small but consistent. Our interactions with him were civil but distant, limited to brief, logistical conversations. The warmth and intimacy of our old family dynamic were gone, replaced by a cautious, guarded relationship. Forgiveness was a distant concept, something that might be possible years down the road. But for now, accountability was the priority. One evening, about 6 months after the confrontation, I was having dinner with my parents. The mood was lighter than it had been in years. They were talking about a cruise they were planning to take, their first real vacation in over a decade. Seeing the genuine excitement in their eyes, the relief on their faces, was a reward far greater than any revenge. My mother reached across the table and placed her hand on mine. "Thank you, Deborah," she said, her eyes welling with tears, but this time they were tears of gratitude. "You saved us. You gave us our lives back." In that moment, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. I hadn't set out for vengeance. I had set out to restore the truth. In exposing my brother's lies, I hadn't just protected my family's finances, I had liberated them from a prison of fear and anxiety. Julian's downfall wasn't my victory. The victory was my parents' laughter. It was the simple, profound joy of a future that was finally our own. The shadow of his illness was gone, and in its place, light was beginning to shine through.